All right, brilliant. Welcome everybody. Thank you for making the effort to come in. I know it's kind of hard to get people to come into town these days, so really appreciate everyone making the effort. Got some really good presentations this evening. One from Peter first on XM Cloud Components, and integrating with another CMS as a Datasource, which looks interesting. And then we've got a debate session that I'm going to lead, put some ideas in front of you, but I'm hoping that you've all got some opinions on headless and whether it's and SaaS and whether it's right for each client, and share your experiences. And then lastly, we've got a presentation from Dom on increased content productivity with XM Cloud, which I think is like a 9-month project that Dom's been working on. So interested to see what he's learned from doing that and getting hands-on experience with XM Cloud. A couple of quick things. So Alex, who's currently on a yacht somewhere, going around I think it's Greece with his mates, has been working really hard on the new SUGUK website, particularly on like the events layout and stuff like that. He's added Next.js functionality and a load of new features. So yeah, he's done lots and lots of hours of work on it. So yeah, big thanks to Alex on all the effort he's put in there with that. Not that he's here to see that, but anyway. And then I did a little attendance survey to see why we're struggling a bit with attendance for these. You can see it got a very scientific 45 votes.
Even poll attendance is down.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that might be my reach on LinkedIn, but you can see overwhelmingly people can't be bothered because they're at home on the sofa watching Netflix, basically. I thought there might be more work-life balance and stuff, especially post-COVID. But yeah, I think how do we get people to come in who predominantly work from home? I'm not sure, so I put another poll out. This has got even less engagement because this was 2 days yesterday, but I also put it to my Twitter, so we'll see. But at the moment, there was some more votes on this today, and it feels, I think this was higher. So it seems like maybe opportunities to progress your career and network and stuff is something that might encourage people to come. But failing that, we need to buy some Xboxes or something to get people to come. So I don't know. I mean, maybe we need to talk more about how actually you can, it counts towards becoming an MVP if you're sharing knowledge and all that kind of stuff. But then I'm not sure how much clout that would have. But yeah, this is definitely a challenge and definitely open to ideas from all you guys on how we can encourage engagement and get people to attend. So I'm not sure what the point of that slide was, other than to say that.
One idea was we were saying wasn't it about like sort of like related Sitecore talks, weren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
Like personalisation or accessibility or something like that, which is within Sitecore. We people touch on it, but I don't know what anyone's thoughts on that.
So is that to effectively widen the audience and other people might come outside of Sitecore?
Especially given there's a lot of focus on front-end development now, and people are moving more traditional back-end MVC, .NET developers are moving perhaps into the world of Next.js and React and whatever now, because things are moving that way, and maybe we need to open up more to that to try and diversify things a little bit, attract different audiences. I know that Martin Miles has created a headless user group, so it'll be interesting to see how that takes off. Maybe even talks that are like more like Dom's one about kind of business analytics and that kind of stuff as well, not just developer talks.
I think we need that blend, don't you? Is like sometimes you want client case studies to get that connect, it's real, it's gone live, something's happened, isn't it? But then equally, sometimes you need the real deep dive stuff on how did you get from A to B, what did you do? Yeah. It's trying to get a mix, isn't it?
But I like the idea of giving out laptops as prizes. And I think giving out laptops.
I think we're officially co-opting you as prize finder.
I will find.
Yeah, we might need some funding for that. I'm not sure Flux Digital's got it in the, but we'll see. Yeah, maybe Sitecore can provide us with some PlayStations or Xboxes or whatever. Unlikely. Anyway, my next slide's in this deck are for the debate session, so I'll hand over to Peter.
Thank you. 1 sec. All right. So my talk is XM Cloud components, using an external CMS as a data source for components. So this is the agenda. So I'm going to first go through pure versus hybrid headless. I'm going to look at the overall landscape of various different concepts that I won't read out, but hopefully giving a bit of background as to why I think XM Cloud Components is an important feature, and then also, interestingly, where it fits in that landscape. I'm going to talk about web components in general, because XM Cloud Components are web components, and then moving into XM Cloud Components, and then either a demo, if my internet works, or otherwise I've got the demo in slides, if that fails. Okay, so yeah, starting with pure versus hybrid headless. Everyone may have seen on LinkedIn and Sitecore posting about IDC MarketScape, their sort of hybrid headless content management systems of 2003. And hopefully you can see on there's the likes of Sitecore, Adobe, Optimizely, but what you can't see is some of the other sort of famous headless CMSs, whether it's sort of Amplience, Content Stack, Conceptful, and what have you. So for me, the definition of a hybrid headless CMS is where the kind of SDK is coupled with the presentation layer, and the presentation is coupled with the content. And so you almost, taking XM Cloud with JSS as an example, you almost have to use JSS. You could try and kind of hand roll that yourself and integrate with Experience Edge, but I think the SDK is almost not optional. You kind of compose a page within Sitecore, and so the CMS is very much responsible for that presentation. And then the API you're receiving in the layout service or Experience Edge contains that presentation details. And then also in places, if it's, for example, a rich text field, it will contain HTML, which to some extent is more designed for web channel, I would say, because obviously if you're a mobile app, you're not using the React Native SDK for JSS. Perhaps you need to parse out all of that HTML in the markup to get to the pure content, and then the same with the kind of presentation details, the sort of placeholders, components, and what have you. You kind of need to get rid of that if you just want the pure content. So by comparison, if you look at Content Hub 1, which is a sort of deemed a pure headless CMS, again you can see on the left hand side here where IDC MarketScape for headless content management systems, where Sitecore, I think perhaps hopefully will break into that. I think if you look at Content AI, they've done very well to kind of decouple from Kentaco as their original offering, to sort of move into that space. And then on the right hand side you can see the head is really decoupled from the content. So optionally with some of these CMSs there are SDKs, but as I say, the content is pure. You don't have that presentation details in the response, and so multiple heads can almost consume that pure content and multiple touch points without needing to worry about either the markup or the presentation details. So some sort of downsides: there's no WYSIWYG in what a lot of sort of Sitecore people who are used to traditional Sitecore would expect from a CMS, where you can kind of have what you see is what you get editor, and it's really focused more on content modeling rather than building pages, and in that way it's good for omnichannel. So this slide actually I stole from, I had a call with an ex-colleague of mine who has created a product called perfection.dev, and it's a DXC product. And so he showed me this slide, and I sort of asked if I could steal it. So you can see the sort of history of a CMS. He's back in 2000, maybe people were building custom CMSs. 2010, I think, for me, I think it's more like 2013, 2015, where you've got the sort of perhaps monolith. If you take Sitecore Commerce as an example, where you've got the commerce engine, you've got XDB for personalization, EXM for email, and various other things, all part of this one, what's termed maybe as a monolith product. And then moving into 2015, again, I think that time is wrong. I think it's more maybe 2018, 2019, where the kind of pure headless CMS has come on the horizon. And then what he terms as kind of future, maybe is a lot of that is now with kind of static site generation, federated content layers that we'll look at subsequently, and sort of really focusing on omnichannel. So, as I say, I'm going to quickly talk about, so DXP obviously is Digital Experience Platform, DXO, the O is the same, well, DX is the same, O for orchestration, DXC, the C is for composition, and then another concept I'm going to touch on, because this is what XM Cloud is front end as a service, which traditionally would be called FaaS, but I think that's function as a service as well, so often is referred to as FeaaS. And then I'm also going to look quickly at federated content layers. So the reason I think it's become quite complicated, I feel like often when people are talking about composable, they'll start with technology as being the starting point, whereas for me, I think it kind of stems from Gartner in 2018, I think, spoke about composable business, and talking about packaged business capabilities, where you're kind of looking at different business capabilities and then bringing composable services into those capabilities. So say, I think that's probably a presentation in itself, but say for example, if you've got your shopping cart, you could have that on mobile, you could have that on web, maybe elsewhere, and you may have composable services that you need for that capability, whether that's your sort of commerce engine, your DAM, your CMS, and what have you. And so in my understanding is that the selling point of a composable business model is that you're then flexible in that you can switch out your providers of these services without, and also whether it's kind of upgrades, whatever it may be, you've got that flexibility in your business model. So I feel the response to that is, and Sitecore's response to that, I would say, in my opinion, is their composable DXP. And so you can see on here all of the kind of new products, and so whereas traditionally you might have XDB and XP for personalization and kind of acting as a CDP, EXM for sending emails, maybe in that regard you could have Sitecore personalized and CDP if you aren't using XDB, whereas traditionally people might have XDB enabled false, but they're still paying for the product and they've still got to go through that with upgrades. Maybe you just don't need to buy those services. And the same for other things. If you're not using commerce, for example, obviously you wouldn't have order plan. But I feel the composable DXP is one flavour and one approach to achieving a sort of fitting in with a composable business model, and there's alternatives to that. So in the people are probably familiar with Uniform, with the Sitecore guys that went to create Uniform. So DXC, I would say Uniform is a DXC product, and it really focuses on web channels. So it's kind of providing a SDK. And when I've talked about the Pure Headless CMSs not having that sort of concept of composing a page, those DXC products enable you to kind of plug in those different headless services to create web experiences. And then DXO, an example, Sana Remeke is a really good speaker that I follow on LinkedIn, but she has a DXO product called Concierge AI, and it is more focused on omni-channel. So obviously the downside being that you're integrating with an API rather than a SDK, but as I say, more fitted for omni-channel. So then federated content layers. Hopefully you see there's an overlap in a lot of these different concepts. So Gatsby, I don't know if anyone's heard of Gatsby Plugins or Valhalla Content Hub, but it's almost like a composition layer, but at the hosting, from the hosting company. So ultimately you can and you can see here, Netlify bought Gatsby, and then Netlify Cloud, and effectively they've merged those products. And as I say, that the concept of, and you can see in the diagram where you've maybe got kind of WordPress, Contentful, all sort of going into this Netlify Connect federated content layer, and then from the hosting provider, your application in a similar way with Next.js, when you're kind of pre-rendering markup and they're generating JSON to sort of populate the content. It enables you to, in a really performant way, whether that's statically generated, whether it's incrementally or even dynamic, you're, rather than calling all of these different systems, or rather than needing another product to compose these different services, you can do it in the hosting provider. So another concept, as I said, with Pure Headless, there's not this concept of a WYSIWYG. Vercel have, in a sort of similar way, it's a hosting provider, I would consider Vercel, but they've got this concept of visual editing in Vercel, where you can effectively edit your website in a kind of draft preview environment, and it gives you that ability to have what you see is what you get editing experience. But it depends on the vendors to implement it. So for me, I don't think Sitecore, at least with X and Cloud, I don't think they'll go that road, because there's a big overlap with Sitecore Pages. And perhaps with Content Hub 1, it could be a fit, but we'll see how that goes. So front end as a service, just to kind of ensure we're all on the same page, I feel they are normally accelerators, and a good example of that is Vue Storefront, where instead of kind of composing a web experience in the way that a DXC product may, it's an accelerator for a storefront. And hopefully you'll see how X and Cloud Components is kind of an accelerator for X and Cloud rather than a composition tool. And as you can see there, lots of words on that slide, but ultimately is not an accelerator for a storefront. So half the things you might need to build if you were building it from scratch are part of the front end as a service product. All right, so web components, which, as I say, X and Cloud is built around this concept. They're basically a modern iframe, is my reading of web components. And I'm sure every web developer, if X and Cloud was saying, we've got this tool and it puts iframes in your markup, I'm not sure it'd be that popular. But web components hopefully is a much better concept. And this in itself is probably a separate presentation, but that's the sort of basic building blocks of web components, where you've got various APIs that are available that allow you to, this point 4 is what X and Cloud is, allows import of web components from separate resource definitions, such as X and Cloud. And then you can see, and I've taken this actually from Sebastian Winter, who's got a really good video on X and Cloud Components on YouTube. And you can see there how X and Cloud is going Experience Edge to your rendering host, but Components is actually a separate product that comes with X and Cloud, but it goes via the CDN, and then you're consuming that direct from your application. Okay, so X and Cloud being a front end as a service product, and as I say, I'd really recommend, if you're interested in X and Cloud Components, watching Sebastian Winter's video. He does a lot of videos originally on SXA, and I think it's kind of a similar concept to SXA, or at least there's some analogy. And so, again, it kind of describes the three main components being the component builder, the styles, and then data sources, which I'm going to look into in more depth. And so you can see the styles section. So ultimately what the style section of XM Cloud Components is doing is building a style sheet. Now if you think of web components as being a iframe, even though it's not an iframe, but it's a similar concept where the style sheet or the styling that you're using in that web component isn't going to affect the rest of the DOM. So effectively, in a similar way to an iframe, where if you've got styling in that iframe, it's not conflicting with the main site's styling. So what you're doing in the style section, and as you can see, all of these, whether it's fonts, colors, various other things, you're effectively building a theme up, and then when your web component, which again, with the analogy of an iframe, is on the page, it's using that style sheet that you're generating with this UI. Okay, so XM Cloud example, I'm going to now switch and see if my, I think it's going to work, I think my internet's okay. And hopefully do a bit of a demo. There we go, 1 sec. So XM Cloud, for anyone who's not looked, you've got a few different concepts. Something that's worth, I think, remembering is Pages is a really nice UI for editing, but under the hood, it's got the way it's kind of storing the data is a very similar way to classic Sitecore, and ultimately you've got a content editor with the same kind of tree structure that Sitecore people will be familiar with, and so when you're editing the pages in XM Cloud Pages, it is editing the items in the content tree, as you can see here. Okay, so going to XM Cloud Pages. All right, so you can see on the left-hand side, I've got my pages, but I've also got the options for components. And ultimately, these are the web components that I've described previously, and you're able to ultimately put these on a page by just drag and drop, and ultimately if you think about it as if it were an iframe, what that will enable the SDK to do is have that component on your page, and when you render it in your app, it's then going to make a call to the CDN and get that web component into your page. But it enables you this kind of same sort of experience of editing components that we'd be used to in Experience Editor and Horizon. Okay, so I'm going to click through to Manage Components. Hopefully it's going to be okay, good. And then I'm going to go down to my bottom one here. And so ultimately I can, you can see I've got a really basic component here. I can, on this canvas, I can add various different elements and kind of configure a much more complex component. I can then, I think, if we go and look at the styles quickly, you can see how you can build up a theme from all of these different blocks. You can, as I've said before, that's building up your style sheet for your web component. And you can see in here the block elements, inline elements, and so on, that I'll build up with that theme. Also, just before we go back to the component, you're able to configure data sources for your XM Cloud component. And so you can see at the top here my test data source. And ultimately, you can make a call to a REST API, you can make a call to a GraphQL endpoint, or if you've got a data contract and if, say you haven't got access to the system, you can paste that JSON in here, as I've done, and then you're able to almost work with that API response in your XM Cloud component. So if I now go back to components, Look at me. Okay, so going back to my really simple component, what you can see if I click on this this heading element here, you can see in this text field where I'm able to configure, I could have it as static content, and in which case, and do bear in mind it's early access, it's not a production product, so listening to Sebastian talk, he was saying how at the moment if you have your static data source, you're not actually able to edit that in Pages, and equally if you're calling off to another system, you haven't got that bi-directional relationship where you can go and update that from Pages. He felt the static data sources that are within XM Cloud would become editable in future. Who knows with the external systems. But so you can map effectively, as I say, with if I want this to be whatever properties coming from the external CMS, or in this case my JSON, you can map what that what field from your response from the CMS is going to populate your component. Okay, so from a sort of viewing it or consuming it, you're able to, you can consume these web components from any application. So if you've got a normal React app and you're not using sort of JSS in this React app for whatever reason, you can create components, and if you import this npm package, you can effectively consume the XM Cloud component in your app, and as I say, it's a web component coming from a CDN that will come into your React app using this snippet here. Or equally, if you're not using the React app and you just want markup, you can take markup from here, and effectively, that's what I've done earlier anyway. So you can see all you'd have to do is have the script on the page with the link to the style sheet, and then using this HTML element here, sort of parameterizing the attributes, and then that will bring your XM Cloud component on any given page. So if I open my page, hopefully, yeah, there you go. So if I inspect that, you'll see how the style sheet that we've populated, that we've kind of put together with our theme, is sort of injected into the component, and then you can kind of see the grid system that's in play in XM Cloud. So ultimately, it is as simple as that, and as I say, I feel it is a front end. They're claiming it's a front end as a service product, and it's kind of an accelerator to get started quickly with XM Cloud. For me, and that's why I felt it was worth going through the landscape. There's a bit of composition there if you're kind of composing pages with external systems. I feel like there's a little bit of overlap. But ultimately, that's it. So yeah, thanks very much for your time. Any questions or anything you want to look at in XM Cloud?
Yeah, I've got a question, which might be not really that relevant, but so I know you're saying front end as a service. Can you do it the other way around though, where you build like a React component and then use that as a Sitecore component that you can put into Pages?
I mean, you can do that with XM Cloud,
Right.
And that would almost be the normal components that would be in
Sure.
XM Cloud.
Yeah.
But XM Cloud components are web components. Like I've said, I know that's super confusing.
But Sitecore have done themselves no favours with their naming.
Well, actually,
Everything's
that's
a generic term.
That's why at
really
SUGUK,
confusing.
Sebastian was calling them. His presentation was titled "Cloud Components,"
Right.
to make that sort of distinction. But I think he's been told now to call them XM Cloud components. But yeah, so in answer to your question, they would be these web components that, again, the analogy being of an iframe, where they're not coming from a sort of React component that's consuming the API to hydrate it. They are being kind of injected into the application.
Yeah, and the opposite of that is just a JSS UI component.
Yeah, normal sort of React component in JSS.
So where would you see Sitecore Connect going into this? Because you can already get data via, say, GraphQL.
So I would see Sitecore Connect, and actually Sitecore Connect I would say is function as a service, as being more of a back-end, I mean you can consume it on the front end, but I would see it more being for, say for example, webhooks firing off events from to connect to various different systems. But I totally agree that from like this whole composition perspective, Connect is almost doing composition, but I feel like it's more on the back end. And so examples of that could be if you say for example if you've got some kind of personalization and you want to be firing webhooks based on events and then pushing that to CDP for example, and then consuming that from the front end via CDP is how I maybe see Connect fitting into that.
Can you put a form in one of these components?
Well, it depends on what you define by a form. I don't think there's
I'm just talking. You mentioned Connect. I was a use case might be I want to capture an email address that is going to get fed through to my CRM.
Yeah.
Can you put a text box and a button in one of these components that can call a workflow in?
I feel like you could, but obviously not a Sitecore form. I don't think there is the concept of
I
Sitecore forms.
appreciate there's no Sitecore forms going on
Yeah.
here, but just it will physically let you add a button or a text box.
I mean, you say that. It's an interesting question, Jeremy, because I feel actually you're not getting the opportunity to edit the markup.
Yeah,
So-
that's kind of my question. Is there actually a way to put these things?
So my feeling, actually, thinking that through, I think the answer is no, but I don't know. But I feel like all you've got available is what you've got in that drag and drop interface. So until which time they provide a form.
And there's nothing for button or text box at this point.
There is one, but I don't think you can actually edit the markup. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, my user case when I was helping them out was just e-commerce basically, and you can imagine with cards, we created a block for a card, and added an extra button to it, and various things like that, so buttons were there as style, but it didn't then do anything other than go through to another page, for example.
So it's more of a styled link than a trigger some JavaScript button.
And you
Submit or something like that.
and you can configure that in the UI to have a link.
Yeah.
In a way that I don't think you'll be able to trigger a form. And I also am not sure that JavaScript, custom JavaScript, I'm not sure they can access the Shadow DOM to pick up on that click event of the button.
Where does the data that you're creating with this actually live? Is it inside your Sitecore instance, or is it off in some nebulous cloud database?
Well, I suppose in the concept where you're linking off to a third party, like another CMS, for example, the data lives in that CMS.
Sorry, when I say data, I mean the information that describes the definition of your web component.
Yeah, so I believe that lives in within Sitecore,
Right.
and I believe that it is actually. So if you're, say, I'm in Pages,
Yeah.
and I've put XM Cloud component on my page, I haven't checked this, but I believe if I go to Content Editor and look at presentation details.
I know there's a component. Is it just stored it in the presentation details of that?
To be honest, Jeremy, I've not checked, but
Because I didn't know you could do the call it from outside the Sitecore thing. And
Yeah.
that's suddenly making me think, actually, does XM Cloud need to be here? Is this really a standalone thing that just happens to have an integration with XM Cloud?
I believe that Sebastian was saying you can't buy it on its own. So you can buy XM Cloud and have once it's live, you can have XM Cloud components, is my understanding. But if you were using it, you'd also have XM Cloud sort of sat there.
So it might be hiding in the content tree somewhere.
That's what I think will be the case. But one way or another, I'm confident it's living within XM Cloud. As to whether or not
It's actually in the content database or not.
yeah, but my feeling is if you can say if this pages is sort of sort of next phase of Horizon Editor,
Yeah.
and under the hood you can still use Content Editor for kind of configuring those pages. I feel like there's at least a reference there to it. I'm not sure I'm going to get that done in quick time, but I'll check that.
Yeah,
during the
I mean,
next
I know if
talk,
you
and then
go and
I'll-
look at the presentation details for an item that you put a component, a web component on, there is a FaaS component
Yeah.
UI rendering definition
Yeah,
in
on
there.
the presentation details.
But I was just wondering whether I haven't looked to see whether that stores all this data or not, or whether actually it's just a reference to some other system.
Yeah. All right, I'll try and dig around during the debate.
I brought the complicated questions.
What was the biggest challenge you had with using XM Cloud components so far?
To be honest, I think it's been really simple to use. But what I think is, for me, a challenge is proficiently using the sort of styling builder. I just think that maybe takes a bit of practice to get really good with. So for me, I don't feel so confident. As you can see, my really basic component. If you're building something really complex and styling it using these kind of themes, but for me, I just think that takes a bit of getting used to, and I suppose if that's targeted at marketers, I'd like to see a marketer get in there and be sort of configuring these themes and styles and see how that goes. But and also, if I'm honest, I haven't fully got my head around. You can see here like the CSS variable that's kind of equates to any given thing that you're configuring in the sort of style theme. So for me, I think that's probably for me the hardest concept. But otherwise, it's been really user friendly and really quick to get started with a basic example that I guess you could extend quite quickly if you could get on top of this
I
concept.
think it's still a dev task because there's things like reusing CSS assets and things that someone who wasn't technical wouldn't necessarily understand.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But I don't know what the target is, but I can't think many marketers that I've worked with who I would be proficient in that without a long sort of period of training and what have you. So I feel like it's still a bit of a dev task.
My suggestion to the when I was doing, like they say, the research and stuff was like, that should be the designers who have access to that, and control it and stuff, so it's linked into a design system.
Yeah.
So that you've got, devs looking after their bit, designers looking after theirs, and then the marketer just picks the bits that are already in place. So there's no creating your own stuff. It's like you can still make your own components, but it's using that secondary copy. It's not picking a new lime green or something.
Yeah.
You've worries what's going to happen, isn't it? It's back to the good old days of picking different colours.
Well, that's where I sort of feel there's a bit of a similarity to SXA, where with Creative Exchange, and it was almost trying to make a bridge between like marketers, developers, and designers. But as to whether there's many designers who will be able to go in there and sort of take their Figma design, transfer sort of everything in there. But I wonder if there'll be some kind of connector at some point to actually take a design system and port it into there, which I don't think is that big a jump. I've seen Figma APIs that can basically take all of the styling and copy that into a solution. So it's not too far of a jump, I don't think, to somehow marry it up with this.
Is the CSS it creates pretty good and modern and standards?
Say that again, sorry?
The CSS that it generates in style sheets? Is it pretty pretty good?
I mean, it's something that I'm not clear on actually is whether or not you're getting the whole thing, because for me, what it should be is only the CSS that you're actually using in that component.
Yeah.
So I haven't taken the time to figure that out, but hopefully it's only giving you the exact styling that you need for that component.
Yeah.
And for me, that is part of the definition of whether it's good. If you're importing this whole thing in every single component, for me that doesn't feel efficient.
Yeah, there is a whole kind of page weight question hiding under the surface here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's inline styles though, right? So
Yeah.
Ideally it would bring the critical styles at the top and then the rest further down the page. For
Yeah.
Performance.
And then not.
Share some files as well.
Yeah, exactly, and then not include anything it didn't need.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at that, and I don't.
There's a big old comment in the middle of that. That doesn't seem very optimised to me.
Yeah. Well, and bear in mind it is early access, so I sort of wouldn't blame Sitecore if it was subject to change and going to improve on that side of things.
Is there a challenge working with XM Cloud in that it publishes the static assets? So what if you needed like dynamic pricing data, for example?
Well, I don't think that's a limitation of XM Cloud, because you're ultimately from your front end, and whether you're server-side rendering and calling it on the on the back end for front end, I don't think there's a limitation there, and unless you're statically generating your pages. But for me, that's where the ISR, the incremental site regeneration, or you can just have SSR pages that are dynamic and they server-side render every time. There's also middleware functions perhaps can sort of come into play in that case. So I don't feel like it's a limitation of XM Cloud. You're ultimately building an app, whether it's a React app, Next.js app, or whatever you choose to use, and I feel you can still have that dynamic data, and it's almost an architecture decision of how you're going to approach that.
So then if you were just creating a component in Sitecore components, you would just make sure there's data available, because as you showed, you can call GraphQL endpoints, so you just make sure there's an endpoint available.
It doesn't do that at render time, does it? Or does it do
Well, bear in mind, it's not actually, say if you're server-side rendering, it won't render the XM Cloud component server-side, I don't believe.
But the thing that gets injected into your web page, this component,
Yeah.
that I had it in my head, that was a chunk of XML sitting, or HTML sitting somewhere that's just sent to your page. It's not something that runs in the context.
No, that's a question I don't know the answer to. Is it calling? Let's say you're calling a external CMS, or you're calling it commerce provider, whatever you could want to call. Is it calling it in real time, or is it? I don't think it is, if I had to guess.
I had it in my head that that's not a use case for this approach. This is more like, I want to give my editors the ability to create like advertising banners or like teasers and heroes and things that pull content from other systems, because that content is relatively static. You design your layout, you connect it to that thing, you hit publish on your component, and it fetches the current content and caches that chunk of markup for delivery to the page. If you want to do something that's dynamic pricing, that's probably a client-side bit of script that is, is probably a more traditional Sitecore UI component. And as you mentioned, talking to middleware and those sorts of things. But I say that not knowing nearly as much about it as you do.
I think we're probably in the same boat, Nick. But I would agree with what you said, in that I think they are for getting marketers something quick. They can using a UI without necessarily a developer. In theory, they can get something almost published very quickly, and circumvent the release process, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Can you personalize these components in personalized
Well,
SoundCloud?
I mean, I suppose it depends what you're doing with your personalisation, because my feeling would be no, because
it's page level personalization.
Yeah, so in page
so you could
level.
have two different variants that show page variants that show two different versions of a component. It's not personalizing the component, but you can make the page change.
and in that regard, I suppose what you'd have to do is have two different
JSON files.
yeah, almost having two different embedded components, and you say in the case of Sitecore Personalize, you're using it to show or hide one. But what I don't think you can do, and I think you've spoken before about using kind of full stack experiences.
Oh, that's different. I mean, personalized inside XM Cloud. It's
Oh, right.
entirely different.
Oh, I see, right. Yeah, so I think all on the front end for it, and I think you could do something to either show one front end of the service component or show the other, and then it would almost show that web component. But I don't think you'll be able to do like server-side personalization on
no.
like you would in a SSR React app, where you're actually calling the APIs and then depending on the dynamically changing the content.
Okay, because I know myself, I tried to personalize SXA component. It works quite well because you're just using different data source.
Yeah.
But for these XM Cloud components, I did not know whether you
I think
have any
it's
controls.
basically that, because the thing, you had a tab up for Datasource before, and I think you can have the same layout and style with different data sources. So whether that's a different URL or whether that's a different blob of JSON like you've got here, I think it's basically the same pattern.
Oh.
Yeah, if there's any more questions, then we'll take those in break. Do you want to have a quick 5-minute break for everyone to have break or have a drink?
Yeah, sounds good.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. So yeah, welcome to the next session. This is a debate session. The idea is I'm going to put up a few things that I've thought about with SaaS and Headless and kind of challenges that various businesses, projects, etc. might have with moving to SaaS. I don't have a huge amount of experience with this myself because I've only kind of experimented with XM Cloud and not actually got any hands-on experience, but the project I'm working on right now is in we're upgrading to Sitecore 10.3, and the next step is looking at SaaS, looking at XM Cloud or potentially alternatives, and moving our front end into headless implementation away from MVC. And I think there's a lot of customers in this position at the moment. So yeah, I'll put up my thoughts on this, and then I'll turn the camera around so you guys can get involved. But yeah, off the top of my head, some of the challenges I saw were things like your general business objectives and strategy. So does SaaS align with that, with the direction that the business is going in? Not all businesses are necessarily set up for the world of SaaS and headless, and that might mean some actual change within the business first to get everybody on board. And then you've got potential budget and resource issues. My understanding is XM Cloud is definitely not cheap, and obviously there's a lot of work involved in basically re-implementing a lot of your MVC-based application and kind of stuff that's baked into pipelines and stuff like that. So there's work involved there to do that. And then a couple of fairly big ones, I think, things like security and compliance requirements, and then hosting and legal requirements. And I think I'm right in saying XM Cloud, you have to pick a particular geographic.
I think that's true of
Location.
all of their SaaS products.
Yeah.
That you can ask for roughly where in the world you want it to be,
Yeah.
but that's limited by where Sitecore have physically got it.
Yeah.
And I sorry, I'm stopping over your introduction.
But you can only have it hosted one place.
And
I think,
there
as well.
are some places where you can't have it hosted. I think
Yeah.
that's the most important thing, that you might live in a legal jurisdiction where they cannot provide that service in your area
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah, so there's some challenges around that, and I can't say I fully understand them, but I think there's definitely some customers where this would bring some problems to the table. And then some kind of developer ones, so obviously any kind of non-service-based code that runs in pipelines that's baked into your Sitecore solution. The one I'm working on currently, there's quite a few endpoints that live in Sitecore. Well, that's not allowed as part of your XM Cloud license. You have to move any APIs out of Sitecore, even though technically they might work. You'd be in breach of your XM Cloud license as well as I understand it, to run APIs in the CM. And obviously your MVC front end needs completely rewriting to headless. And then, any other kind of customizations, modules, connectors. You can't install modules in XM Cloud. CM customizations are limited to mostly kind of configuration, pipeline-based stuff. Connectors mostly aren't there. And then, training and adaption. Okay, behind the scenes, the CM's still there. You can still use it, but actually, there's a whole load of new interfaces for your staff and developers and stuff to learn, and new approaches to development and so on. And do you have the team, for example, Next.js developers, React developers, etc., people with experience of working with SaaS platforms? And then the last one, cost and licensing. Is you've got to get a different license and engage in the license discussion with Sitecore. So I don't think this is all of them. I'm sure Jeremy's got a few, and hopefully some of you guys have got some input on this as well. So I'll turn this round. So who would like to who would like to go first with some thoughts? I reckon Jeremy's probably got a few.
I was just going to ask, is anyone actually working on XM Cloud deployments at the moment? Sorry?
I'm on an XM Cloud project, but I'm not going to do it.
Well, sorry, I don't mean physically doing the work yourself, but you are actually working.
Yeah.
So, how much of was that a client coming to you saying they want that, or was that you selling them that concept?
It's in my talk, isn't it? I think it was a combination of both. To be honest, generally it was sort of like, we need these things, and I'm sort of trying to find the right solution for it, and it just was that happy place that XM Cloud was the right product for that. They're challenging. I definitely think it depends on the client, doesn't it, and what their website does. Whether it's e-commerce, whether it's just more static content. I think that decides what direction you go in at the moment. There's a lot of this. Definitely the training, definitely the cost. They're there anyway, regardless of your XM Cloud or not. But it's whether you want to duplicate it, whether it's best having it in one tool rather than separate two. Because obviously some clients could have separate instances of different websites on different CMSs. And by bringing it into XM Cloud, you're actually saving money because it's that version of the training. Whereas I get the point here, it could be just, I've just trained you in XM Cloud, XP, now I'm going to train you again.
Yeah, we've spent a while teaching how to edit content in Experience Editor, and then they've got to learn how to use Pages.
Yeah. And for the devs too, it's only I know what they've had to build is a completely different way of thinking.
I think there's a problem kind of from both sides. You've got customers who are already using XP or XM, not cloud, and are used to, were probably sold on it being extensible and all the things that people buy Sitecore for. Well, with XM Cloud, a lot of that's gone. You don't get that anymore. So they've got a problem with the people who already know Sitecore and bought it for a particular set of reasons in the past. Perhaps they would, those same reasons aren't there to make XM Cloud. And then there's the new people who aren't on Sitecore right now, which are looking at XM Cloud and seeing actually it does the same thing as quite a lot of other products. Whereas in the past, the things like the extensibility of the platform or the fact that it was this all-in-one platform was something that they were sold on. So for both new Sitecore customers and for existing people on XP or XM, there's a problem about being able to sell that idea to them.
I think the same exists. So I've got 2 headless implementations at the moment. I work in the strategy side. Both of those have to be low features and low functionality in order to implement. Because that's what's there. So it's the same representative as it is for the other providers.
So you wouldn't say XM Cloud as such has got limited features versus competitors in your...
Not in my experience.
I think that there's possibly a background thing there that you said you can't install packages.
Modules, as far as I understand it.
I may be misunderstanding this, but there's no head, there's no CD server anymore.
Yeah.
So you can't deploy a sitemap module and have it publish a sitemap because there's physically no server to put that on. But I think if you customize the Docker config with asset images and stuff, I think you can still have things running in your CM. You're just not allowed to use them to serve the public internet. I think you're still allowed to use them for integration points.
Yeah, so I don't think the module install worked, but if you
No,
were
sorry,
to put
you
something
can't
in your-
literally upload a package.
Yeah, but if you were to...
you can customize the Docker images that it's running.
So for example, Sitecron might work if you were to extract it and put it in as part of your Docker deployment.
Yeah,
that
I
might
think
run.
that is true.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if they even took away the module installer. It's just you'll install it, and then as soon as you do a deployment, all the code will vanish again because you've written to disk in an environment where writes to disk do not persist between reboots of your computer, basically.
Right. Okay.
So are we specifically talking about SaaS? Because you could do headless FaaS, for example.
Yeah, I suppose I'm confusing 2 different things here a little bit, but I suppose it's just a big part of moving to SaaS is you have to adopt headless, like you haven't got a choice, which is why I've made it part of the conversation, I suppose. But yeah, you could still go to headless without moving to SaaS or XM Cloud.
I mean, one thing I like about the SaaS model, I remember working on a project. It was a Sitecore instance, and it had just blown up for like absolutely no reason. I know we've probably all been there. But it turned out that some infrastructure engineer had gone onto the disk and like deleted a DLL or something or a file, and the whole thing had blown up. Well, that can't happen, or shouldn't happen with the SaaS model. And we've all been there as well with the network engineers who are the gatekeepers who just don't want to give anyone access.
Yeah.
Or they don't want to, sometimes the system would need updating, or maybe you need to make a change to an app or whatever, and you'd have to go through a ton of red tape, to get these sort of things done. Again, that whole blocker, I think, in SaaS.
Upgrade's kind of gone in the opposite direction with this. To some extent, it now magically happens without you even asking.
Yeah.
With people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, all the things that are proper SaaS, so the pages front end, their deployment engine, the edge caching for content, all that sort of stuff, they just magically update whenever Sitecore have an update for them. They promise not to make any breaking changes. How much of a pinch of salt you might choose to take that with is probably down to experience. So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. That in the past it might have been difficult to fight for updates because you had people gatekeeping it, but there are also risks with a situation where stuff gets updated without you even asking.
No. Flashbacks then. Well, one of the biggest selling points of this, surely, to organisations is you can say, you don't need that whole network infrastructure anymore. Those servers that are sat in a room, and, you know, and you would think though as well that'd be more cost effective because you don't have the staff who are maintaining it, or you don't have the hardware itself, you don't have the network. But I almost feel that the pricing model though, it doesn't work out more cost effective necessarily, whereas it should do.
There's a collection of interesting things bundled up in this. You know, one of them is many clients are used to the idea that those sort of infrastructure costs come from one budget, and the people who wander around pressing buttons on routers come from another budget. Suddenly, all of that cost has moved to one place. So your capital expenditure has gone down, the operational expenditure has gone up. So you've got a budget balancing exercise to sort out there. And I think you are right that there's a good old profit margin that has been put on top of this to save you the bother.
Yeah, it's like the infrastructure cost plus the maintenance cost plus the XP license cost all roll into one big budget, isn't it? Which technically should be cheaper or similar. But is it? And I think also do customers understand their total cost of ownership? And I'm not sure they do.
And I think the way I don't spend a lot of time worrying about licensing stuff, but I saw some numbers today which I have to carefully censor myself on to not actually talk about in detail of. But in the old world, we might be used to the idea that you pay a fairly big chunk of money to have Sitecore, and then you have a bit of an argument with them about, I need 5 sites in production, so I'll give you another 50 grand on top of that to get the extra sites. If you want 5 instances of XM Cloud, that's 5 times the cost of XM Cloud, and it wasn't cheap to start with.
Yeah, probably should have environments. I mean, right? Because you only get 3 environments.
Well, that was 5 instances.
5 instances with 3 environments each.
Something like that. Yeah.
But bear in mind, if you're a big organisation, that's replacing potentially a whole team internally.
You still got yes, less network engineering work, less infrastructure cost on the back end stuff. There's still DevOps work. You still got to deploy this stuff. But you still got to pay for the head potentially, because I don't think I'm not sure that number necessarily includes Vercel. I know Sitecore will resell Vercel, or give you deals on Vercel, but not everybody's going to use Vercel anyway. So I suppose that's the fundamental problem with everything on that, where you don't buy the product, you lease the product.
Yeah. But with the perpetual license, I know you'd pay maintenance, but you'd almost buy the product. So people on the subscription license traditionally, I think, are more amenable to this recurring cost.
Is any, I mean, other than people who are still using Sitecore 7 because they bought it 15 years ago, are they still letting anyone buy a perpetual license?
It's interesting. I doubt they're letting people buy new ones, but I still think there's a fair amount of customers on the perpetual license.
Every customer I worked with over the last 5-6 years has been on a perpetual license. None of them use subscription yet.
It's a tough one, because I think once you've got a solid deployment pipeline and it's spinning up maybe the resources that you need itself, there's not that much management. There shouldn't be that much management around the infrastructure. So if you've got auto scaling, so you're not manually scaling.
Well, there's no scaling in this.
No, but I mean,
just doesn't happen.
If you're not using SaaS, so therefore, does it make sense to then move over to a SaaS model where someone else is handling all that, whereas it's potentially not a massive headache anyway? I don't know. I suppose the question is, how much of a headache is it, running the PaaS model where you're having to look after those resources and stuff?
I guess if you're like an enterprise client, so the client I'm working with at the moment, they've got 4 Azure environments. I'm currently going through an upgrade, so there's some others in the works, and there's 2 DevOps guys that are looking after those environments. Some others as well, but it does mean quite a lot of maintenance and work for them for backups and monitoring and disk space
But some people want that ownership, and even you mentioned sort of compliance on the list. Some people have even got requirements about compliance that they have to have that sort of ownership and sovereignty over their infrastructure and data.
Yeah, I think banks and various other
Well, yeah.
financial institutions will have problems.
I mean, there are some organisations that are absolutely in the no, cloud is evil, we must physically have the thing in our data centre. But probably the tipping point for the more security conscious organisations is going to be when Sitecore managed to get the tick in the box for like HIPAA compliance or the other world alternatives to that sort of we've put the data security processes in place that because this is running on Azure. Azure supports those things, so Sitecore have to piggyback on top of the existing infrastructure compliance with compliance for their processes and their software. And I don't know whether they are doing that or not, but it feels like something they should be trying to do if they want to expand their market out a bit to those sorts of organisations. But I suppose I don't know whether that's cost effective or not. How much business they win versus how much it would cost them to do it.
Is there anything we've missed up there?
I just wanted to touch on the missing features like forms. What do we do about forms in the headless world? So for me, it's like SaaS should be accompanied by FaaS, function as a service. Because technically, yes, you can still create that headless component, simple like form where we become capturing name, email, and the button.
Yeah.
But processing of this data, where is it happening? Surely neither in XM Cloud nor in our phone. Needs to be another service.
Yeah, I mean the
Plus infrastructure.
Forms is coming before the end of the year, apparently. To XM Cloud, so there will be an XM Cloud.
But the point stands, not just forms, anything like
Anything.
where you need some sort of.
this circles back to the composable thing, doesn't it? That in theory we don't care where that stuff happens.
Yes.
You just have to pick the service that best fits you and then wire it in.
But if you
Adds an additional
if your
cost.
existing
It adds an additional
if your
cost.
existing provider doesn't allow that, so okay, I've got Hubbox in the States, and there the forms it's like a ticket management system. 2 clients running on that, no API. I just have to embed the forms in the right way. And I lose all that data. Just circumnavigates my CDP because it's going through to another source. So that's the one.
And search again to the extra cost.
Yeah.
It's not there.
Yeah, I was surprised to see the search, at least the basic implementation of search was provided.
I think a lot of people were.
I think this is probably just, this is composable, but it kind of fits into this. It's just that with composable, the cost is far more difficult to predict than that. Like we know what, we can get an estimate from Sitecore about what their bits are going to cost, but then like there will probably be additional service functions.
Yeah.
You know, you may go with Sitecore Search or another search provider, but it's a lot more difficult to have one number before a project starts. How much it's going to cost.
And I think that's complicated by the fact that a fair chunk of this stuff is billed kind of by usage rather than as a flat fee. So you know, if you start using something like Locato, which is what sits behind the Sitecore Connect stuff, you pay per execution of your pipeline. So if you have a week where nobody fills your form in, it's cheap. If you have a week where somebody writes a bot that is constantly submitting your form, suddenly your bill goes through the roof. That sort of load-based cost is not predictable at all.
Just on a business perspective for us, we've had more leads from our Go this year than we have from Sitecore.
Entirely surprised to be slightest.
So there is a benefit of that. You know, you happen to use our Go for the search and implement that, you're actually getting more business. So,
Yes, I suppose actually that's the consideration we don't have here, is the impact of this on us as agencies and delivery people, that we're used to effectively partnering with one organisation that gives us all the stuff in one box, and now we're potentially partnering with many organisations, which you might have a better lead pipeline because you've got more companies throwing work at you, but you've also got to invest more effort into talking to all these different businesses and keeping them sweet.
And very hard to become an expert in
Yeah.
that many platforms.
And to bring that back to your very, very first slide about why people aren't coming into user groups, perhaps because there's fewer experts and less people focused entirely on Sitecore.
Yeah, probably true. Yeah. I think going back to what you were saying as well, Mike, about losing the sort of USP of Sitecore, Active Cloud, I guess, eventually might have more of a USP because there's not that many headless platforms with a WYSIWYG editor like Pages, I guess, and if they can get some kind of search into there and forms and tick some of these boxes, these sort of big gaps at the moment.
Is there risk there not by the time they've finished it, every headless CMS will have this?
Probably, yeah.
But maybe a USP for them is from a procurement perspective that they're offering this composable DXP rather than having to have vendor relationships with 6 or 7 different companies. I feel a bit like they've hung their hat on that concept that they can provide all these services with one vendor relationship, one procurement process.
It's the composable monolith.
Yeah, you've got to go. Most organisations have to get 3 quotes, don't they, and stuff. So you can imagine if you've got 6 products, there's 18 quotes you've got to go spin up. You could go.
And sometimes that might take 6 months to go through for one of them.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and maybe a different challenge for existing Sitecore customers versus potential new customers. So. Oh well, I think unless do you have another point?
No, I was just going to say the point you've made about training is I'm sure we've all seen that trying to scramble to get certified on Content Hub, CDP and Personalise, whatever the next is going to be.
Yeah.
There's a big investment for agencies as well as customers on trying to keep up with that change, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. I think, unless you're a partner at the moment as well, getting access to XM Cloud is pretty difficult. So that's a challenge as well.
And also, at Subcom, Dave O'Flanagan 100% said they're going to introduce the concept of a CD to XM Cloud.
I heard that, yes.
And I even tracked down Andy Cohen and asked him, did I make that up? Because I spoke to loads of people who said I didn't hear him say that. And Andy Cohen said he did say that, and when he said it, he had his hands in his...
he means Vercel in that scenario, surely. He doesn't mean a traditional CD server.
What, so effectively what, just serverless functions in Vercel replacing the concept of it? We badly worded it, if that's the case. But I suppose the point about needing to transition from an MVC front end to a sort of headless model, I'd be interested to see if they do introduce a CD, what that looks like. Will they support ASP or?
All right, cool. So I think you're supposed to come to some kind of conclusion, right?
Well, it's Bettridge's law, isn't it? Whenever there's a question in a headline, answer it with no and move on.
I think it's no, not yet.
Yeah.
And I think others are in the same boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Even if there's a big dragon trying to burn your city down.
Well, that's just that dragon represents marketing from composable content management purposes, doesn't it?
Debate session was a good concept, I think.
Cool. Well, yeah. I think that's some interesting points. So, yeah, thanks very much. Right, cool. Last talk then. So, Dom's going to run you through increasing content productivity with XM Cloud. So, hopefully going to learn a lot from this. Sounds really interesting. Cheers, Dom.
Cheers, thank you. The good bit is a lot of what we just talked about. Some bits in there featuring this, so you get some of your answers and maybe not all the answers. But no, cheers for the introduction. So this talk is for a bit of context, revolves around, I was going to say a case study, but it's a project I've been on for the last 9 months with BDO from Mayor. Obviously there's my colleague Dirk's name on there and he's not clearly in the room. But the reason why he's on there, and it's quite a lot of other people should be on it too, is it's a, I don't want to say a joint deck, but what we've all done together, we've shared between ourselves, and we're telling different stories of depending on what your role is on the project. So quite a few of the slides are his anyway, so we'll give him the credit where credit's due. So who am I? For those who don't know, I think most of you do know who I am, but senior consultant at Accenture. Also got a second job at the moment as well, and director with Neil. But in this sense, I was used on the project as a Sitecore SME. They wanted someone there who had lived and breathed content migration, going live with sites, but not just from an agency side, but from a client side too. So based on previous experiences, I was a prime candidate for that. Obviously the other things there, I've got MPV and stuff like that, but I'm also a Sitecore tester, which actually came quite in handy with this one too. So when I've been testing, I've held down components and with search too. So obviously both those two products sort of come hand in hand in the discussion anyway. A bit about the agenda, so just quickly, I was going to go through the main different bits. So I was going to talk about the customer case and sort of understand what the drivers for using XMCloud. Based on the previous conversation, you'll see why they picked it. I'll go through the design system and the architecture needed to go with that. I'll then talk about the main bit, which is obviously that content and build, and literally, okay, how do we actually get stuff built and done? Because yes, the tech's important, but if you're the content editor, getting content, getting it all on a website, getting it all live, that normally takes longer, from my experience. So we wanted to show how we can help with that, and then obviously some lessons learned too. So a bit about the customer. I can probably guarantee most of you have never heard of them. However, I can then guarantee that probably 80-90% of you have got their products in your house. So they are, as it says, they're global leader in heating appliances. So for those who've got old-fashioned normal houses, we've got Baxi boilers, Remea boilers, loads of stuff like that. That's their products. Equally, if you've got the new builds, they've got loads of the heat pumps and sustainable heating, all of those new concepts. They're one of the big leaders in that. A lot of stuff of what they do is B2B, not B2C. So a lot of it is, you've got all your tradesmen, your housing companies, they deal with them, sell to them direct, and then off we go. But obviously the model they're going to move into is shortly you can buy your own model online and do it that way. So they've had Sitecore for a couple of years. They've had struggles with it as well, not necessarily the product, but getting it implemented, and that classic 80-20 rule, isn't it, when you're trying to get most out of the tool. So a lot of the content editors are the ones who've struggled really. So they build stuff, but to actually get things done and moved on it, they've had a bit of a struggle. We've got 20 brands or over 20 brands on their site. So you can imagine there's back to UK, back to Spain, back to Italy. There's quite a lot of different sites, all completely different and done different ways. Like it says there about they sell warranties online, but a lot of the content is, I'd say, more like sort of static content. So a lot, understanding differences between boilers, for example, those type of things, or finding an installer. That's the type of content they got. But they obviously want to move into this e-commerce world. And as well as the 20 different branded sites, they've got different setups. They call their businesses like opcos. The different setups, so that's not just what version of Sitecore are on. So they're all on different versions of Sitecore. Some have got agencies involved, some have got in-house, some are like one-man teams or one-people teams, and other ones have got big teams of developers and content editors. So they've got a right good mix of different things going on. So you can imagine the complexities that are trying to do different things. So why migrate? This came down to 2 points. This is why we ultimately went or thought XMCloud was the right product. First bit is this balance of the tech and sort of where that lives. So it says there about there's a balance between what's at a global level and what's at a local level. Where they were before we used XMCloud was quite a lot was at the local level. So different, like I say, configurations, different setups. Then trying to drive stuff like that at a global level was really hard to sort of dictate. If you're trying to go, right, we're all going to move to the next version of Sitecore, that's quite a challenge because we're all on different setups. Linked to that, as mentioned perfectly, was the effort, the cost to maintain, to change, to do anything across the board. You can imagine when like cookie banners came in and everyone had to have a cookie banner on the site, trying to do that at that level and trying to get them all to do it within a 3-week time limit, it's very, very hard. With the setups you've got there. There's also the concept of, as mentioned again, the security one, the risks, especially around GDPR. That was a massive driver that what they currently had wasn't ticking all the right boxes. They had to move quite quickly on that front. And then also the upgrade efforts and trying to make sure that everything is the latest, up-to-date systems. It's a full-time job for one site, let alone 20 websites, so you can imagine the work involved on that. So there's definitely that aspect of let's try to get everyone in the same sort of like level playing field. On the flip side, you have then own internal experiences. So it's Sitecore there is like saying it's perceived as not very user-friendly and complex to use, and that's obviously just someone's opinion. But you can see why when they're on XP, how that can be there. And the direct correlation is that impact of getting pages live, to getting your work done. It's quite complex. The productivity levels are quite low in trying to get a page live, trying to get anything done. Then you've got increased costs because you've got to bring extra staff in, maybe to double your editors, trying to get the work done quickly. And what they wanted there, as the word says, is like they wanted that change with energy where you could literally have something like 3 changes of content, I can do it and move on to the next page and the next page and actually deliver things quite efficiently. There was that lack of knowledge, and I think really when lack of knowledge is not lack of knowledge of what they were doing, what the product was, but because of those local instances, you just had your knowledge in your area. So it was very, the Italian team couldn't really pass much on to the Spanish team because they configure things a completely different way. So then trying to do things like that collaborative training exercises about like the whole new version, that was just impossible. So again, costs go up because you have to do training 5, 6, 7 times with different people at different levels. It's all really important. Governance, again, that was on the slides before, on other slides. Having that directive at the top to be able to make change at a strategic level where you can add value, that's for a business, that's what they're after, to tell them, I can't do e-commerce, but I can in Spain, but I can't in Italy. It's very hard to comprehend at that top level of we've invested lots of millions of pounds in this, why can't we do it? So a lot of the information there was very hard to get through, very hard to sort of challenge and to try to get an official viewpoint of where to do it. And then there's that dependency on agencies. Like I said, there's that setup of different ones having different systems. Obviously, most of us here are in agencies. We're not evil or anything, but you can just imagine 20 websites, 18 of them using 18 different agencies. Costs are just going sky high very quickly. So they were their 2 main drivers to go, right, I think XML is going to work for us. I'll come back to this one quite often, and you'll see with the talk, this was sort of like based on what you've just seen there, this is like a bit of like our mantra, so that build global, but configure at a local level. That's the world we wanted to get at, where we could give opcos and their sites that freedom. However, it's freedom that is centrally managed and centrally sort of ran at pace, at scale, that they could actually get things done really quickly. So that's what you'll see later on in the talk. The next bit I wanted to go on to then was about the design systems in place and how that all connected with the architecture. So, how many know about design systems? Most people, yeah. So, design systems are the easy one to explain, as the various different elements there on the page. Ultimately, it's that collection of your things like your typography, colours, font weight, all those sorts of like the foundational elements there, bringing them together and obviously grouping them together, whether that's into building blocks and obviously then into templates. It's just something that will give you that instant sort of like stealth to be able to deliver stuff, but in a very consistent way, in a very like agile way too. So this obviously design system is obviously very much in line with your brand. If you want to change your brand, it's your design system you're changing, not everything else tying in together. So obviously we had one of them in place, that was really good. We had one of them in place, but that had several brandings within it, which you'll see in a minute. What we also used is design tokens. So who's aware of design tokens? this ties nicely into the fact you made about components and like the CSS element. So I'll try to explain these as best as possible. I do have a design background, so I should know how to explain this, but as it says there, the design tokens, you can imagine breaking down that design system into small little sort of type of decisions. And each of them are like, when you group them together, then you represent that bigger visual style, so that it's your classic sort of like Lego bricks. But these ones themselves sort of take away what was in the CSS away. You would have hard code, you know, in the code you would have gone like, this is red, this is padding, this is weight, this is all these different little elements. You're replacing that by a design token. So you drop the token in once onto your page, and you don't have to touch it again. Whereas in the past, say, I don't know, let's say you had to change the colour blue. You know, it's there in the CSS, but it could be there in a hard-coded someone. You've got to faff around every different template component trying to find where's this different colour. So these make it a lot more linear to be able to make changes on the site. As you can see here, they should have self-explanatory names. You get them in different ways as well. So there's different example ones there. So you've got tokens that sort of represent more component type things. You've got ones that then go higher up at system level, and then the top level sort of one go like, this is for everything. And you have that combination within your pages going, bringing these little tokens in play. Again, the tokens are kept outside of the well, they embed the token itself, but that's what is connected to the design system. So again, you're living in this world of some things outside of Sitecore, but then other things in Sitecore, but it's making it a lot more easier to make changes at stealth, but equally making sure that they've got things they can play with, they can use, that isn't going to affect brand if they misbehave and try to click on different buttons and pick different colours. Some real examples of this, and this is probably an easy way of showing what happens. On the right there, you've got, this is all in Figma by the way, you've got the design, it's the home page made up of all those building blocks and different elements within on the page. On the left is what you've got is your design tokens, so when the user jumped in here, they could go pick which token they wanted or which site. In this case, they got the white label one, but they could have changed it to Gatsby Plugins, whoever the company is, ticked a button, hit apply to selection, and within Figma, straight away what you're seeing there will change. So Gatsby's blue in colour, I think Remay's yellow, so they will literally all change. It's not just the colours though that change. So obviously here you've got like, you know, primary, secondary, tertiary colours. Yes, they all change and they're all locked in, but it affects padding. It affects sort of how things lay out on pages. So some countries, for example, yeah, they wanted the better space. Some of them wanted, like you see the top hero one, where the background colour goes to full width. That all changes by just the click of a button of the design token, not having to create a different token, a different component for someone wants it full width versus a different component where someone doesn't. So it's all kept within the whole system. And again, within the Sitecore, when you set up XM Cloud, one of the options you pick is which set of tokens you want. Straight away, I want Gatsby. Site is built, it puts up to the Gatsby design token straight away. This is one of the ones Dave did, and the things with all the flow diagrams, this one represents it really well. What on earth, how, you know, happens behind the scenes. So we've got Storybook, and we've also got DevOps. So DevOps is obviously the tool for publishing, building everything, using code and user stories. So the marketeer, first thing they do is, right, I'm off to Storybook, see what's going on, see what's there. Obviously the mantra is try and reuse stuff that already exists. If it doesn't, then it goes through to the designer. They then work in Figma, push all the new tokens straight away into DevOps. At this point, the developer's going to pick it up. They then go, right, I'm going to just double check things that are going on Figma, things that are going on Storybook, you know, so either if they don't have the knowledge, they can skill up very quickly, and then obviously they push it through. And when it gets pushed through, part of it goes on, obviously, until live site goes live, the other bit updates Storybook. So we're living in this world where everything's up to date, everyone's talking the same language, picking up the right changes. We're not in that sort of more like, you know, a waterfall approach of designers going to do something and then wait for the next person and the next person. Everything is live, is up to date. This one then is the technical stack and how it's all put together. Again, I don't own this slide. I'll try to do my best to explain it. I know rough things there, but this is what what is there and what we're building on. So obviously we've got the design system, I mentioned about how that works together. That's then pushing into all the websites that are built on Next.js. And then at this point, this is where it's separating out. So obviously you've got the Sitecore side, all that bit. But then you can also hook into other things. So obviously analytics, we mentioned search. You might have Sitecore's one, or you might have someone else's. And then obviously the next lot is trying to pull all that information, APIs going into all the different systems. So they've got a CRM in play. So obviously some things when it gets pulled into that. And also we've got One Trust, which is their it's linked into their cookies and stuff like that. So then that dictates what else you can do on the website. For example, it can deactivate analytics, do different things on the page, or remember who you are. So then if you're using personalization, you can leverage that too. That's the stack we've got in place. So everything's good at this point of view. We've got a really good Figma design system, design token, brilliant. We've got XM Cloud, brilliant. You know, it's the right decision. But the reality then is, like I've mentioned, is how do you get people to put content on, and how do you get it to put it on its speed? Like I mentioned, this project, the full project is 2 years and it's still ongoing at the moment, but this first bit was 9 months. So that included building everything, the design system, and getting at least one site up and running fully live. So, you know, for the content people, you know, at this point they've got like 4 or 5 months of going, right, I've got to lift and shift all this content. How do we do it? So I'll go through some of these and where we actually leveraged XM Cloud. So the first bit was the information architecture, and we used scaffolding. So obviously the bit on the left is your sort of your AI. What we did with scaffolding was that when someone created a new site, as well as picking the design token, they picked whether they wanted a sort of a standard site or whether they wanted an advanced site. Depending on that, straight away we built content pages which had both components in there and templates in there. So yes, you had to change bits of the content, however, large parts of the site were literally there. Because we're talking about like 20 different websites, we couldn't nail the architecture 100%, so it's roughly like 90% there for most opcos who set this all up. So one of the first tasks we actually gave them was to then go in, start changing the architecture, add the pages that were missing, delete the pages that you don't want. And that was a nice way to actually get them used to using the tool too. It sort of had a double win. But it really sped up their process to where they can go, right, first task, let's just start putting content on existing pages, and then we'll talk about fancy page that only exists on their website. We also used page designs and partial designs. So for those who haven't seen that or haven't seen that sort of concept, obviously in the middle bit is your pane where you work on the pages. Obviously bits in purple are the ones you can edit, as you've seen in the demo before. Some bits you can't edit, they're the partial designs. Classically you're talking like header and footer. But in the world we were at, we actually used quite a few other little areas where it was needed. So your partial design is something, in my head, the easiest way of defining it is something that's reusable and consistent no matter wherever you use it. So I'd say your classic is your footer. You're never going to jump into any page and start trying to edit your footer. You just want to do that in one area out of the way, but we actually use that for other areas of the pages. So quite a lot of areas they had, for example, like Find Your Installer, which was made up of several components. Equally, we had like Contact Us, sort of typical sections where, you know, there would be a photo, bit of information, various different little call to action. So again, we grouped them together. So very quickly, an editor could just drop that whole block on a page. If they wanted to edit it, they edit it in partial designs, and hey presto, it ripped through the rest of the website, you know, everything's all up to date. So the key here and the tip is definitely, when it comes to your content, is think about what's reusable. You know, when you're coming down to building blocks and templates, is have a think of what's going to work. Next was your component options, so that's the bit on your right hand side. So here you have various different things. You've got manage items, so if you're doing things like the carousel, for example, that's where you can manage like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can change that. We've also got layouts and styling. This is the one where you connect it very much in sync with your design system. So for example, in the design system, we built variations of a component. So it was one component, but there's different ways you could skin it. So for example, you could have things either scrollable or horizontal. You could have 2 content blocks, 3 content blocks, 4 content blocks. Rather than building them as separate components, they are one component, but we use the styling to leverage that. So it was a quick way for an editor to be able to go, right, it's the same bit of information, but I can go in here and I can change it. And again, a tip here is definitely think about the language you use and like sort of like how it works, how the bit of the functionality works, whether you're using a drop down, whether you're using radio buttons, those type of things. Make sure it's very similar to what they've seen in Figma. So if they're used to being able to flick a thing in Figma and that's using a drop down, do exactly the same in the design system. It's got to be easy for them to use. How we did that in reality is whenever the developer was building it, they obviously like bang up the content editor every so often and went, would this work, would that not work? How would you expect to be able to change this design or that design? Following on from that and akin to it is about working the system, not the editor. I think it's fair to say poor editors who've got XP are getting worked quite a lot to be able to do any bit of content and information. This is where we need to do the reverse of it. And I've mentioned here the classic one of less is more. So some really good examples of that. Alignment is one of the features in layout on the right hand side. We didn't need it because our design system dealt with that. We didn't want an editor to be able to mess around. By default, they're given quite a few options, so what we started to do is remove them all. So make it as easy as possible, only give them a field that they need to be bothered about messing around with. Equally, ones like where you had like missing text or you had like hidden text. You can see in this example here with the blue bits, that was like a secondary heading which didn't have to be filled in, but what we wanted to make sure was that they knew that was the case. So again, we sort of work the system going like, let's make sure they can see what they can edit, what they don't have to edit. And then that way it's much quicker for them. In this example, this is like a content block. They could just jump in and go, right, bit easy, change the heading, change the text, boom, gone, on to the next one. Whereas if we didn't do that, they'd be like, do I put a heading in, do not put a heading in, what do we do? We'll definitely think of things like that. The next one was component naming and grouping. So obviously, we've seen the demo that Peter gave, that where you can bring in your components. Again, not really helpful naming this. But we've got our own components that we've built. The key here is to, again, align this with Figma. So bear in mind, Figma has been their playground first. This is where they've seen things. If we called it a hero, call it a hero. Don't start messing things around. You can group your components together too, which is a really good one. So you've got things like media or navigation, group them all together. So again, that's what we started to do, was going, okay, right, if this is more to do with like hero elements, here's a group of hero components. So this navigation, start doing the same. The one thing we're trying to wrestle with and trying to get Sitecore to change it is the icons. You have to pick them. And we were like, can't we have our own icons? Because if we could have our own icons, it'd look nicer. On our website, their website, they've got a full-on icon bank of really good icons. We're like, can't we actually use them? So we're getting there, but again, just make sure there's those consistencies in the site, because that familiarity is what makes things a lot quicker to implement. And then finally, build for the future. So we've talked about components. It's there, it's coming, isn't it? I don't have to explain it anymore. Peter's done that before me, so that's good. The key here in the tip, 100%, you've got to have a design system in place to do components. Don't even attempt it without having a designs in play or a design system in play, because it's just going to be the wild, wild west. So these are already sorted already, which is good. No search out the box. You've obviously got to go either buy the original one or the new one they've got, or come up with some other solutions. For us, we didn't need a search. We didn't need that typical box of a search. Find your pages. A lot of the pages were either the navigation dealt with it, or the content. We knew people were coming directly from Google. There was just no need for it. However, we did need faceting and filtering for various different areas on the website, so for like news pages, for example. So we did need the fundamentals of search. So we've managed to use elements of the content tree to be able to do that for us. So we've leveraged what we can as a temporary solution until we have to cross that bridge. And I'm sure at some point, one of their 20 sites will need a search on it. At that point, we'll hit the button and change how we do things. Again, forms isn't in there. We've been told Q3, but again, you might have to find a different way of doing it. And again, our solution was we've actually kept the forms in XP where needed. So the user doesn't actually know what's going on, but they will actually jump between new site and all bits of pages that are there, but it's seamless to them. We still get what we want, we still get the tracker, we get everything we need, but it's just there for the time being until the forms are there.
It's Q3, they haven't got long.
No, it's one of those. I mean, at least we don't have the yearly releases anymore, but yeah, it might get pushed back, I suspect. And I know the obvious one we've talked about again is headless. You're going to have a bit of legacy, so this is where you've just got to pick your battles, haven't you, and pick the right areas. The team recommended Next.js. That was what they wanted. And obviously, we're using the APIs that we need to. That fitted our user case that we could shift to that model, and we didn't have that legacy hanging around. But I realised other clients might not be in that space. Some lessons learned from the project team. So the first bit about the Sitecore pages is not your experience editor. Pretty obvious one. It looks completely different, doesn't it? But as you've seen with the examples of how we've wrestled with the right hand side and wrestled with the left hand side and bits in the middle, you've got to build for pages, and that takes a bit of extra learning, a bit of extra training, like we mentioned. What our team did, and what was really good, is they had those peer reviews constantly, nearly every day. There was like a 3 minds where developers were having chats going, which is the best way to do it. Like I said, we brought the content editors in going, will this help? Will that not help? Which is the right way to do it. There is no right or wrong answer because we're all learning it brand new. But it was just definitely right to say that the lesson learned was to have those constant conversations and go with the consensus and build off that. Early involvement is really important too. So right at the start, we had designers all going away and talking about brands. We had all the architects going away and getting the infrastructure right. The key though is to get both of those groups using XM Cloud at the testing it, messing around with it, because that will affect their decisions and their design process. So that's why we went down the tokens route. It's because we knew we could do, and that came out from messing around with the tool. What can we do? What can't we do? The next one about sharing experiences. This was really important. So not just developers and designers, but we've got the clients all involved in these calls. We have them every fortnight. So it was really good. So not only was it sort of knowledge learning and sharing as you'd expect, we had the designers showing what the latest things in Figma were, which were going to get pushed into Storybook and going to go live. We equally had the developers showing what bits they've just built and showing it, and then sharing that with the group. So the benefits of doing this, and why obviously it sped up the process, is we dealt with all those common, that's not my red, that's not my blue, that's the wrong font, all the conversations that you will all have. Normally they come out when you just hit the go live button and it's like, oh, you got the wrong logo. It's stuff like that we dealt with straight away, and we've got them all bought into the process straight away. So that meant that when they had access, there's sort of not that we were complaining, but there was none of those teething problems. We were literally, everyone's happy, everyone's good to go. We had the managing expectations, so we've talked about the bits that were missing. It's really important to have those conversations and to be open and honest. The form one, for example, we could have quite easily gone, what's coming at the end, we'll park it, we'll deal with that at the end. We sort of dealt with that head on and actually go, right, okay, when we go live, that isn't going to be the case. Or if it is, that's a bonus. So it made our decisions in picking the right opcode to go live with. So we picked the ones which have the least forms, or the least complex forms, should we say. So we actually made our decision based on that, for what's going on. But obviously with the client as well, there was that open and honesty, to be honest, which helped having those conversations. Logical releases. So I mentioned at the start, I was in this project as an SME. Obviously that's not necessarily a full-time gig, so I actually was doing the BA role as well, which is the first time I've done one, which is a talk for a different day. But the bit that I managed to get through and which really helped, based on my understanding of doing releases like this for several clients, was about getting the release in the right order. And by that I mean getting the right templates and components live at the right time. So where you saw that scaffolding, and certainly the basic scaffolding, our plan was to make sure that those pages were the ones that got released first. So obviously we did like product pages first, then home pages, then about us. We got the right components and the right template to go hand in hand live at the same time. Because what we did was obviously we did training at the start, and what we didn't want to happen is that then there's this void of 9 months where we're building all the site and we're making sure we've got 100% every single component lined up and then letting someone loose on the system. So what we wanted to make sure that happened was as soon as they'd done their training, they were given XM Cloud, they had this plan, they knew which components were coming, they knew which ones to focus on first, to get cracking with, to get building. So there was no delay, there was no dependency on the future release. They could literally go in, build their content as we're then building the next set of templates and components. So that was really important. And then the final one, again, really obvious, but we're with Sitecore and our product team. We talked about forms, we talked about research, various other, all the different things. We had constant conversation with them. So, because we're learning, they're learning, it's a new tool that, as well as we want to know what's coming next and what we've got to work with. Equally, they want to get that live feedback off us, because we were one of the first people to start using XM Cloud on clients, so they wanted to get that instant feedback. So it's really important to have those conversations and to sort of bat ideas off each other. There's some things, even a developer's like, I don't know how to do this. And Sitecore people are like, we've just built it. there's no documentation, but together we'll work on it and try to figure things out, especially when we were challenging them or pushing them. And then finally, these are some of the outputs and the things that came about. So deliverable wise, I mentioned about the 2 architects already. There was that one design system which had those brands, so there's something straight away at that global level. Then equally, then we had that one version of XM Cloud. Obviously there's different brands and companies within it, but they all shared the same 13 templates, 46 components. So them at a local level, their customization, you're talking about hundreds of permutations of what they can do with different templates and different components. But it is all governed at that central global level. We obviously baked in SEO and analytics from the get-go too. So again, site goes in straight away. If they hit the publish button, which obviously you won't do straight away, but if they did, they're going to have all the right things in play straight away. They don't have to worry about GA code that's already in there. They don't have to worry about half the SEO things that are already in there. So they're all at play. Some of the results though, they're the really good bits to sort of champion. So that first one on productivity, and that's where the quote comes at the top. It's like 790%. They were so much more efficient creating pages. That's not just XM Cloud, but that's the things we did on top of XM Cloud to make sure that it was easier for them to do compared to XP. The unfortunate bit for the team, because I work with them day in, day out on this, they went from 2 extremes. They went from super happy to super sad, because what they have to do in migration is when you get a change, you have to do it to a new site and then an old site. So they're jumping between XM Cloud and an XP and then crying that it's taken a day to make a change to a page versus what was minutes in XM Cloud. Equally, back-end was very similar too, so how the devs worked, how they changed. I mentioned at the start they had quite a few learning curves to work together and change how they do things. But equally, it still was much easier for them to start building pages and to get components live very quickly because of Storybook, because we had all the frameworks in place. That slick process of your usual user story cadence and sprints, just really easy for them. Pick component, tick it up, go build, check a few things, have a few conversations, and live. There was no sort of getting really stuck because a lot of the work had been done between the team earlier on. You've got your obviously ones there, all your page speeds. Obviously they're all really good for SEO and everything, but it just shows what the product itself is churning out decent code that's passing Google's benchmarking test. And obviously what we wanted to make sure is that when we go live, that we're not going to fall off the face of the earth on Google rankings. That we're with Google and they're going to rank us quite highly. And then finally, the obvious one is that happiness. So I know the editors were really happy. I dealt with them day in, day out, especially when they did training, that everyone was happy. The really good bit and the really pleasing bit is the fact that we had this 2-month roadmap. Normally what happens in my experience is when you've got different departments and you try and fit them all in, you're on this month, you're on that month. Loads of people go, I'll wait to the end, I'll wait for everyone else to do their bit and learn, and I'll glean off that. We had the reverse. We had people wanting to go in next and I'll pick me. So a lot of people had seen what had gone on with the first site that had gone live. They wanted the same, they wanted to go live next. So there was this really like push to really go for it as a product, which was really nice to see. And then there's the awareness, so that's Matt speaking at DX events. I think he's been to America twice, or he's going to America again, he's already been once, so he's the Sitecore poster boy at the moment. But the reason why it's getting used is because it is, I could say this like, truthfully working on it is probably one of the best projects I've ever worked on. Not just because of the tech, but because of the teams involved, at clients and agency, and we're all around the world in different offices and stuff like that. But we've actually worked so seamlessly together to get this to go live. You know, the difference it's made for them. They were at one point thinking, is Sitecore the right product? Now they're like, I can't be happier. So how we've gone from one extreme to the other is like credit to the entire team who's been involved. So thoroughly enjoyed it. And that's it. Any questions?
So you said about the search, and I think if I understood what you said, you mentioned that you could achieve it with the content tree. So how was that? Was that with the queries against the GraphQL endpoints, doing some basic search in GraphQL, or how did you achieve the search concept?
Bit I understand, and obviously I'm not the developer, but for example, we wanted, I say the fastest thing with filtering. So you can imagine with news, you've got different categories, product type news, corporate news, all those different ones. They were labeled within the content tree, and then it was them that were getting grabbed into a drop down, for example, or how we visually run it. The limit we had was we could only do that once, if you know what I mean. So we couldn't have, I don't know, like search by topic, filter by topic, then filter by date, and filter by something else. We were just limited to just grabbing that one filter tree, which is fine for us because there's not much news stories to start filtering by different under limits, but that's how we were getting in. And whether it was GraphQL, I'd have to ask Derek on that bit, but I understood from a content point of view, it was easy because we went, if you want a new filter category, just go into the tree, because obviously there's a link top left in the pages, isn't it? Go in there, add it, and then when you're in, you don't have to do anything other than publish in the page, and then the end user's there to pick. Off you go. And obviously if you wanted to then target a page under that, it was there in the other view, and I can't remember what it's called now. So go back to it. I can't even see it. Is that small? You've got on the right hand side, you've got all the various different things. You've got the content box. That's where you got all your SEO and your meta and stuff like that. We had a drop down in there to go, right, pick corporate. If you're in a news story, pick corporate, and hey presto, that and linked up to the tree, and it was all connected that way.
Nice.
So it was I wouldn't say it was a workaround, because it actually is a genuine way of doing it. Whilst we're just waiting for decisions on should we go farm, fast, search, fast. But like I said, when the content migration's there at the start, you've not got that many news stories. A year down the line, 2 years, you're going to have double, triple news stories. So that's when things like that start to kick in.
Nice. Got a second question.
Yeah, got that. No, yours a follow-up question. No.
It's not. It's a second question. Go ahead.
Okay. So what you mentioned that the customers and the content editors are really happy and stuff. What was their main reason for that, or reasons for that? Was it they enjoy using pages compared to experience editor, or was it deeper than that?
I think it was deeper than that. I think pages and that interface certainly helps, because obviously you can then visualize something. But I think when you're dealing with content day in, day out, yes, there's times where you preview it, you test it, you check it all works on mobile and stuff. But there's a certain point where you are just cut paste. You go at 100 miles an hour, and I think at that point it was just how the whole interface worked for them. That they just throw a component in there, start adding content. It was that usability, but then that speed element too, that you could just drop in, click on, and then publish your page, and they press it, you're off onto the next one. Compared to XP, their delays, like I said, half a days getting pages live. When you've got several bits to change, but then components are interlinked, and the workflows involved, all things like that delayed it. Whereas here, it's just much more speedy. I think there was definitely that element, but I think how we built it as well, without pass on back to the developers and stuff, that really helped too. The fact they didn't have to do CSS, because obviously there is elements where you can put custom CSS in here. Start hiding those buttons very quick. So, nope, you don't need to change anything there. But again, in the past, that's the world that they could jump into very quickly. So the fact they trusted the design system and the tokens and everything else, they trusted the components. It just focused them, and then that led to the improvements. Like I said about doing pages, you're so happy when you're just talking to them. It's just like, you know, you could just sense someone's happiness. Not that they were skipping into work, but do you know what we're doing? Like, you could just tell they're just super happy.
Yeah. It must be a nice thing to experience, because quite often you get to the end of a big project and there's still a lot of complaints and a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, well, quite often at this point, agencies are like, we're off.
Yeah.
We'll see you later. So the fact that we wanted to truly work with them, I think that's what grew it together. And like I said, what we also did behind the scenes was create that sort of community aspect to it. And again, that's something I just learned from working on different clients and sites, is to get those editors to talk to each other, to champion themselves. So what happened was when Remea UK went live, they demoed it to all the other content editors all around the globe, showed how they did it, how they worked, and then straight away that's why the next person's like knocking on the door about like 2 seconds later going, can we go live? Can we get training? We want them in on this, because it wasn't the sales pitch, they're getting it from their own team.
Yeah, nice idea.
So a lot of it was geared towards making it as simple as possible for the users.
Yeah.
So you would almost say like restricting features or like advanced features of a platform for a good reason.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think that the leverage for this certainly was, you're right, the way the sites are now, they are basic, but the fact you're going to chuck on e-commerce in there and other features, I think that's certainly going to help with that decision. But it was that scalability that very quickly, you know, we can spin up countries all around the site with different language versions, all different things, and they're all connected to that one design system. I think the bolt-ons are logical there. They would really benefit from components. So when we talked about it before, that world of like, we had it where component went live, someone's been using it, 2-3 weeks, and they're like, wouldn't it be good if I had like a second call to action button, and whereas that would then have to go through this whole release process, which is, as you saw in that visual, it's still seamless, but components would have just sped that up 10 times. Obviously they want to do personalization, so the good bit of obviously the personalization is you can do like the light version in this, can't you? So it gets them engaged to go, yeah, I can do personalization, and then obviously when they're ready, they can then buy in the full tool and go like that. I think to me this is like the gateway of getting them on the system. Yeah, it's WordPress stations and stuff, but it's getting them there, getting them on a system they enjoy using, and then you can start sort of going like, do you want this bit on there, do you want e-commerce on there, do you want all these other different things? But you're right, if you just had content, don't even spend all that money just to do it, to use something else probably.
Maybe that's one of the XP is that it's become very complicated, and like we all know that there's loads of projects where they've been sold personalization, and it was a big part of why it was purchased, and then it never really gets done because it takes so long to get everything set up and configured, and you don't have the time to do it. So maybe having something simple and building on it, and then realising they want to do more and buy the full version of CDP personalised is the way to go.
Yeah, I do really like that feature. As much as it's sometimes annoying that you can't do exactly what you want to do as a test. Numerous times I was like, wouldn't it be good if I can't do that. But I think with the rules they've got in there at the moment, it's just a really good learning curve. Because like you said, back in, it's not just Sitecore, isn't it? You're all sold big product, and they say you don't use any of it, but use this like sort of 20%. I think this breaks that model and going, actually, you're going to use 80 of it, and these are the extra bits, and then if you want it, you can go buy it, and you can go use it. I do like that sort of like, it leads you in. I don't think it's done in a dark pattern way. I think it's done genuinely probably to help a client not baffle and on day one. So much stuff going on with the page. At the end of the day, when they go live, they just want to get pages live. Then they want to personalize it. Then they want to do stuff. Then they want to track it.
Do you think they introduced the likes of content or bond to sort of cover the backs against the sort of more simple requirements? Someone might not need like the power of an XM Cloud, for example, but then maybe then content will bond like a cheaper alternative. So we could sort of corner that part of the market as well.
Yeah. I think so, yeah. I think that you got the
Not sure they've called it anything.
Or they try and cover their own backs, stop people sort of going to the likes of WordPress.
Yeah. But then there's the other offerings, isn't it, where content's something completely different, isn't it? And obviously you don't have to worry about editors or anything, you just judge your content in the back end. It just depends on what your site is, isn't it? If so many different ones I've worked on, it's more like sort of intranet type ones, that's where you just we'll store the content somewhere else. It doesn't have to be on pages because they're not bothered about working with that. But then this was a perfect fit for XP, where they could do things in pages, get those visualizations, get things working, skill up their knowledge, all at a consistent level, and then they're already right. Let's go. Let's do personalized. Let's do e-commerce. Let's build their model rather than I think some big companies it feels like it's scattergun. Whereas these guys have got a really good plan, and this tool helps them on that journey.
Was there, with the content migration, was there any kind of automation of trying to migrate that content, or was that discussed at any point?
Bits have been discussed, and some bits have. So there's certain areas where things have been easily moved. For example, I'm trying to make good examples, but where things are more static. So say the fields on facets are all brought across. We've got one where it's find and installer. So you can imagine find and installer. There's regions, there's sub-regions, all that type of stuff was poof, that was done in one go. No one had to configure that bit. But rest of pages, a lot of it is that typical challenge. It's a site that's been up, not been, sometimes the love and care has dropped a bit, isn't it? So you have to redo stuff anyway. And different teams had content editors there, they had content designers, specifically just to handwrite the content and pass it over to an editor to upload and stuff. So it did give them that opportunity to have a bit of a rethink, especially with the branding and stuff like that. The fact we got more online with the branding, you wouldn't believe it that I think it was Baxi, which is blue, the Spanish, the Italian and the English had slightly different colours of blue. I was like, how? There's a hex ref, how has this happened? But it did, and the stuff like that we could as well as get the content level, we could get other things level as well in the system.
You know if plugins can be created for XM Cloud?
In what sense? Have you got any examples?
So, with XP, someone created SXA, for example.
Yeah.
Can you create, can you extend it and create plugins at all? At the moment, no.
You've got to separate the bits when you talk about XM Cloud in this context. You can add stuff into the copy of Sitecore that runs your CM, because that's something you still have control over the code for. They haven't been running it for you, but it's your private instance. For pages, it's one SaaS application that every XM Cloud user is accessing. So you can't drop your own code into that. If there's going to be, maybe there'll be an extension model in the future, but it's going to have to be kind of like the contentful model of you have to host your plugin thing on your own servers, and their UI can call out to your thing like a web component and inject it into the page. But we're never going to be able to run our code in their infrastructure for stuff like pages.
There is going to be a plugin model currently, or has more products than that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have asked, can we do stuff to customize the UI? And it would, I think a lot of other products in this space have stuff like that, so it makes sense to be something on their roadmap, but it's probably not a trivial thing to put together.
More questions?
Do you plan leveraging more features of Sitecore? I know you mentioned about Sitecore search and maybe other search in future phases.
Is there any ones they're going to leverage? Not any others than they wanted. They want personalise, and that's one of the next things they're working on. So obviously, when we went live with sites, you've got to wait for a bit for personalise to kick in on the left hand side. Just got to wait for data and stuff like that. But they're already trying that at the moment, so we've done basic training with that. But it's search in the forms are the two biggies that were there. A lot of the other bits are we see e-commerce is coming and the plans are in place of how that's going to work, but that's more a lot of the stuff behind the scenes, not even like the visual stuff is literally, you know, you're dealing with, like, again, different countries with different systems, with different CRMs, that there's a lot of work going on behind there, but I think that's where the direction is for a lot of the people in conversations, but in terms of anything else on the site, it's just option today, to be honest.
And how many languages do you have? Or will you have in there?
Loads. So, like, even like the ones that have gone through, so I know Romania UK has gone live. One of the ones I did training on, that was it was a Dutch one, but then you had it Belgium, French, and their language variants, and that's just their one site. There's Italy, Germany, quite a lot, mostly like around Europe and stuff like that. So I'm probably pushing like 10 at least different languages. Like I said, most sites have at least one version in there of another language.
And do you have any scripts in place, like in order to create a new market, a new website?
There's definitely something, because that's what kicks the scaffolding in place. So, like I say, when they click a new page, you get a few different prompts. And the first one is like, which brand did you want? Click on that, and then it's like, which, you know, do you want the standard version, or do you want the easy one? But clicking those buttons, you're talking like seconds. Things is brand, and all of a sudden, like, oh, new version. And then obviously you've got like your typical ones like your UAT, test, and live instances as well, and stuff like that. So everything's mostly mimicked between the ones. So it's quite, like I say, to get them up and running is so quick compared to the past, where, like I said, you had to even work with devs to pipeline that all in and just go, right, I need this one on that date and stuff like that. Whereas now it's sort of like, the way we've done it is with like I said, the training is the instigator. We put them all into training. That's when we onboard users. That's when we spin up an instance, and then literally that afternoon I'm doing the training with everyone, and I don't have to worry about everything, because everything's the same. Or there's a new, you know, you might get new components in there, but the rest of it's the same. Unless Sitecore decide to change some bits, which has happened every so often. You're like, what's that new button? So.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah,
Very
thank
good.
you.
I guess that's it. Just want to say thanks to Dom and Jeremy and Alex for helping organise. And even those people from Code here, thanks to Code as well for providing all the facilities.
They tell us what we have to do with the rubbish.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. So yeah, I'll go and drop all that in the kitchen, maybe downstairs.
Take it down to the
Yeah, probably. But I think I know Jeremy will want to go for a beer, so yeah, everyone's welcome to come for a drink. I'm not sure where yet, but there's loads of places in the Lawn Club, whatever, downstairs. So yeah, please come for a drink if anyone would like to.
We said about the London event, didn't we? Not that we're going to say,
yes.
I don't know what the date is yet. But
Yeah. October?
something like that.
Yeah, so I think there's going to be another user group. Alex was talking to some of the guys down London. So if you want to venture down there, I think it's going to be sometime in October. I'm not sure exactly when.
Obviously after when we sign it.
Details will be on your beautiful website.
Yes, on Alex's beautiful website, yeah. So,
I was going to say back to your point at the start, and if anyone's got any thoughts, ideas of like helping with attendance or
Free laptops.
Even like
Chief prize procurer over there.
even like locations and stuff like that. Everyone,
yeah.
Leeds, Birmingham, anywhere, just let us know and we'll.
Yeah, and speakers as well. Like, so if there's anybody that you work with who you can encourage, nag, bully, Jeremy has been trying to, without much success, I think. Then please do encourage people to speak, because we want. One of the reasons I did the debate session is because I was trying to get Code to do a slot, and they were swamped with other work and couldn't get somebody. So, we want new speakers, we want different subjects, and yeah. So anybody that would like to speak, get in touch, let us know.
Again, some of the clients would be really good, wouldn't it? Obviously,
Yeah.
Probably like the ideal, isn't it? And I know they're probably quite not that they're nervous speakers, but they probably fear big technical group, isn't it? Of like, what they probably perceive as all, like, say, all the experts and stuff. But if you can get any of them, I'm sure, I know I'll offer it, but like even like mentoring people or checking decks and helping them and stuff like that, I think.
Yeah.
I'm sure the whole committee would help out on that bit if you've got someone like that.
Yeah. Again, I guess the work from home thing makes it a bit of a challenge.
True.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.